Good evening to everyone. Let me begin by taking a moment to thank our beloved Amal for continuing this ministry, especially providing leadership to the Voice Calling in the Wilderness since its establishment. I know Achen has been very much working to ensure that every week is covered and that there's always someone speaking and coordinating all the efforts. And so I appreciate Achen for his efforts and for this ministry and being able to teach and to guide and to lead us, especially as we continue through this Lenten season and through this period. The theme that I have selected for today is called Into the Wilderness, and it focuses on 4 R's: retreat, reflect, recalibrate, and refresh. So I wanted to begin this evening by drawing your attention to this picture that is on the screen. As you can all see, as we take a look, you can see, this picture of a wilderness. I hope you guys are all seeing what I'm seeing. And as you look into it, it seems like it's the middle of a forest. And oftentimes I have used this picture for meditation purposes and for reflection. I don't know if you ever have gone through a wilderness or through an experience like this, but there's a lot of things that are unknown. If you take a look at the ground, the trees, you see that there are fallen trees, there are mature trees, there are broken trees, and then there are many trees that are still standing strong and look very tall. But then at the same time, you also see many trees that have fallen. You see areas of the ground that have been cleared. And so as you look through, I was thinking back to the scriptures, and I thought about what is really truly a wilderness, or what is truly a forest type of experience. As you go through these different places, a desert, a forest, there's something that is unique as you think about this image and think through what it is that we see and what we experience every day in our life. I remember when I went to St. Tikhon's Seminary for 3 years from 2007 to 2010, one of the most enjoyable things and most peaceful times was our drive around the seminary compound, and for about the 20 minutes until we can get to really the major cities throughout Pennsylvania. When we would drive for those 15 to 20 minutes, it always seemed so surreal. Very much in the middle of nowhere is where our seminary is located, where we are really disconnected from the world in a way. Many times phone reception was not always the best. There was life there, and there were stores, and there was gas stations and restaurants and all those things, but very minimal. And I would always say to our brother seminarians and everyone that it was, in a way, always seemed like we were always in a retreat, right? It was a constant mode of being away from the world. And for those 3 years, focusing in on our spiritual life, our journey, our formation, being able to pray, being able to eat together, being able to study together. And then we would go out on the weekends and travel to the different parishes. And this image is one that always stands in my mind, because this is pretty much almost what it felt like I saw every morning. Every morning when we woke up and we looked out the window, it would seem like it was, just a large forest of beautiful trees and, adoring God's nature and his creation and being able to see that. And so part of the reason why I have chosen this message for today, or for this theme, is as we journey through the Great Lent, it is very hard to withdraw ourselves from the realities of this world. It is very difficult to find even a moment where we can really truly retreat to ourselves and with our Creator. So I just want you to keep this image in your mind as we go through the next few points, and as we focus in on these 4 R's and what they mean for us in our day-to-day spiritual life. When we look at the scriptures, I want to take us back to basically the 3rd book of Kingdoms, chapter 19, verses 4 to 7. If you read those verses in the other versions of the Bible, it is 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4-7. You see, when faced by persecution from Jezebel, Elijah retreated to the wilderness. And when you see that retreat, there was something that came about from it. As he retreated to this wilderness, there was a sense of comfort and strength that he received from God that led to his renewal of his faith, right? I think oftentimes in our spiritual life, we are always looking for that sense of peace, looking for that sense of comfort. We're looking for that sense of direction, but we can't find it in the busyness and in the noise that is within our lives every single day. I always make mention and say that we live in a world where we are pretty much controlled by noise. And why do I say that, and what do I mean by that? When we wake up in the morning, we're waking up to our alarm clocks, right? We usually hear the music or the ringtone or something on our phone that is waking us up in the morning. The moment that we get up from our sleep, we're usually awake and we hear the household of noise where people are talking, people are getting ready, everyone is hustling to get out the door. I know in our home, especially with little kids, we're constantly after the kids, trying to get them ready, trying to get them to do the next thing, and then get focused and then get out the door. Once we're out in the door, you see conversations in the car. Sometimes kids or even families, we're all listening to podcasts or music. And then once we get out onto the road, we start hearing, the horns. We hear the sounds of the engines, and we hear all the distractions that are happening. Once we get to our workplace or once we get to our schools, constant noise around us, people talking, people chatting. Sometimes at schools, we're controlled by the sound of the bells from period to period. And wherever we go, we are just surrounded by noise and a sense of difficulty getting away from the routine things, and including oftentimes people. So if you look at the story of Elijah, you see that he had to kind of withdraw himself. We sing in our prayers of Compline, especially during the Great Lenten time, that Moses and Elijah fasted for 40 days. So Elijah retreated to the wilderness. And what came out of that? What was the purpose of that? And it really comes down to this idea of receiving comfort and receiving strength and renewing us. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 1, verse 35, it says, "Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed." First couple of things to highlight. He, who is he? Of course, it is God, Jesus Christ, our Savior. He went out and departed. Where did he depart from? Right? We see that he departed to a solitary place. This is the story as we begin to see where Jesus withdraws himself into the wilderness after in preparation for his public ministry. And there he prayed, right? He prayed. And it says specifically that he went to a solitary place. It is not easy to find a place of solitude, a place where you can be to yourself. In the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 6, verse 31-32, and it says, "And he said to them, 'Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while.' For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves." So again, here, this is just right around the story of the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus is calling his disciples and he's saying, "Come by yourselves to a deserted place and take some rest," right? There's going to be people coming and going, and there's not going to be even time to eat. And so he's constantly reminding his disciples to withdraw themselves, to get that rest, to find that desert place that they can actually rest and find their purpose and sense of direction. And so it says, so they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. So when we talk about retreat, I think there's two different types of retreats that often come into our mind. If I ask, oh, when's the last time we went to a retreat? Most people attending this are going to say, oh, I went to the, Martha Mariam Vanida Samajam retreat last month, or I went to an MGO-CSM retreat, or I went to a focus retreat, or I went to an OCYM retreat, right? I would say when we talk about retreat, yes, to a certain extent, those are retreats. But I will often say that those are also events, right? And when we go for events, there's something that is planned there. There is a structure, there is a purpose, there is an intent. And for all those that are attending, the hope is that you get some time to withdraw from your everyday routine and you get to come into the church where God dwells and you get to hear some spiritual messages, you get to participate in the prayers, you get the fellowship of one another. But if you really look at the way our retreats function, and I'm not saying anything bad about our retreats, I think those are intended to be there for a reason, because those are some of the limited opportunities that we have to gather as a church community. But how many of us at those retreats can truly spend time in solitude or desert ourselves, right? When you look at Elijah, when you look at Jesus, when you look at Jesus and his disciples, it specifically outlines that they went to a place of solitude. They went to a deserted place by themselves. They went to the wilderness. So they retreated. So they were not just retreating from nature or from the world or from their homes. They were retreating to a place for what purpose? What was the purpose of it? And that's what I want to lead us through in meditation through these coming minutes that we have together. The first thing that I want to highlight is these 6 words that are surrounded on our screen this evening. There's this idea of breaking from everyday life. So I want you to think through each one of these words: break, remove, and disconnect. That is often what we think about in terms of a retreat. We break ourselves from our life. We're removing ourselves from our homes or our normal surroundings, and we're disconnecting from people and from the world, right? But as you think about each one of these words, there's also a word that can be replaced with it. So if you're breaking from something, that means it has to also be restored, right? If you break, something that is very precious and dear to you and it breaks, sometimes you might be able to mend it, or sometimes you might be able to fix it or restore it. Sometimes it's broken and it's gone, right? And it's very hard to bring it back to life. I would say when we say that we're breaking from everyday life, what we're really truly saying is that we are truly breaking. You can't, it's one of those things where oftentimes, including myself, sometimes we go to a retreat and we are not in our home. We are not with our families maybe, but we still have many things that we need to break away from while we're at that retreat, including myself, our phones, our mouths, right? The food that we're eating, and all of those things. When we talk about breaking, we're breaking from an everyday routine of things that are familiar to us, right? We're removing ourselves from those familiarity of our usual patterns and surroundings, and we're disconnecting and detaching from the world. I remember when I was growing up in MGSCSM, oftentimes this was the time when cell phones was just becoming prevalent. Nowadays, it almost seems like cell phones is a mandatory thing or a thing that we cannot live without. Oftentimes at our retreats, it was difficult, especially at our leadership camps in some instances. We would ask everyone to turn in their cell phones, and we would ask them to turn in their keys to their car. And there was a reason for that. And what we would tell people is, if you're truly here for a retreat, that means you got to break from the world, right? You got to be able to know that you're here and there's nowhere else that you need to go to that is going to be more important than here. And you also have to be able to break yourself from the communications. Of course, we would give them the phone to be able to communicate with their families and let them know that they're doing okay. But the point was, you're freeing yourself from those distractions and your surroundings. And when we say that we're retreating, we're bringing ourselves into a place where the ultimate purpose is to restore our soul, to surround ourselves in the presence of God, and to connect with God. This is the ultimate purpose of a retreat. When we go to any retreat event, or if we desire to retreat in God's presence, it should be to restore our soul with a purpose, to surround ourselves in the presence of God, and to disconnect and detach from the world for the sole purpose of connecting with God. There's no other purpose for a retreat that we can see. If we look at Elijah, if we look at Jesus, if we look at the disciples, if we look at Moses, and if we look at all the people throughout the scriptures, each and every one of them have had some experience of a retreat in their daily life. Even if you look at someone like Zacchaeus, or even if you look at the people of, throughout the scriptures, even Paul, you will see they had a moment where they had to retreat in order to truly connect with God. Because when you're going through your everyday life and going through your motions, it's hard to see, and it's hard to connect, and it's hard to hear God, because we are consumed with the things of this world. And this is very difficult, but this is a task that can be done at a personal level, and also at a family level, and also at a church level. And it has to go in steps, one at a time. It can't all be done at once. So just remember, as we think back, remembering the story of Elijah, remembering the story of Christ going out and departing to a solitary place where he prayed, remembering that Christ called his disciples to a deserted place and asked them to depart and go into a boat by themselves. For what? To break and to restore, to remove and to surround themselves with God, to disconnect or detach from the world for the sole purpose of connecting with God. So this is the first R, which is retreat. And so I invite you all this evening on this journey as we retreat. All of you are in the comfort of our homes, right? Each and every one of us in the comfort of our homes. It is very difficult when we're in the comfort of our homes, because right now we might have the TV on in the background. We might also be looking at our cell phones and be focusing or seeing something that's popping up on Facebook or YouTube. We might see a chat or a text popping up right now. We might hear some noise in our homes where people are conversing. So even in this very moment, for the 40 minutes or 35 minutes that we are together, where can we find this opportunity to retreat? How do we retreat? How do we give our ear, our hearts, and our minds to a moment where we can connect ourselves with God? So this brings me to the next point of reflection or reflect. What does it mean to reflect? What I would always say to many of our youth, and even in my own learning, oftentimes I kind of equate reflecting as a check-in, right? It's a constant check-in on the state of our spiritual lives. Every time we reflect, we're not just reflecting, oh, how did today go? What did I do today, and what do I remember that I do, or what do I need to do tomorrow? That's not necessarily reflection. That is, you're recalling things that happened throughout the day, and you're looking at, and kind of winding down your day. But when I talk about a constant check-in on the state of our spiritual lives, that means a deeper dive into our soul, right? And reflection allows us to keep spiritual things in the forefront of our minds. Why do I say this? If I were to ask you what is on your mind at this moment, I can pretty much almost guarantee that you're thinking about either tomorrow and your schedule for tomorrow, or you're thinking about, maybe potentially getting everything done for tonight as far as preparing your day for tomorrow, getting to bed, and thinking about all the things you have to get done within the limited amount of time that you have left between now and the time that you sleep, right? So when we think about what is at the forefront of our mind at this moment, in a way, we are worrying about tomorrow. We are planning already for tomorrow. We are already thinking about the weekend. We're thinking about the next week and the coming weeks. And we are bombarding ourselves with the events and the things that we have to do that is at the forefront of our minds. And when those things that we have to do and those things that are causing us to be focused on that, what I would say, worldly things, it detaches and it takes us away from those spiritual things that should be at the forefront of our mind. I know even during the Lenten period, it's a huge challenge, even for me as a priest, because You are called to so many different responsibilities and to so many different needs of people that in order to truly effectively minister to them, you have to also be able to, in a way, be ministered yourself, right? So if we reflect daily on what God is doing and has done in our lives, it makes living in God's presence much easier for us. So one of the things that we do, if you think about what you reflect on and what you think about each day, we have to reframe our reflection and our thoughts to think through this past day. What did God do in my life in this day? And what has he done in the past, right? So if I begin to look through my past day, just even today itself, there were a lot of clients that I met at work and a lot of people that I saw, people that were troubled, people that were burdened, people that are homeless, people that have very little to eat. And so as I looked at them or as I saw them, I think I saw more than probably 200 different clients coming in through our doors today. My intent or my purpose is to try and give them some sense of joy despite the suffering or the pain that they are enduring through. So as I greet them at our door, I'll say, good afternoon or good morning, and how are you doing today? And then they'll say, some of them will say to me, I'm blessed. I'm blessed. And so I thought about that for a moment, and I see how they are reflecting on what God is doing and has done in their lives. Even in the midst of their suffering, even in the midst of their circumstances, many of them don't have cars, many of them don't have resources, many of them don't have families or supports. For them to be able to say to me, I'm blessed, helps me to realize what God is doing, not only for them, but also for me. And that is what I mean by reflecting on what God is doing. That even in the midst of our struggles, even in the midst of our sufferings, even in the midst of our worries or anxiety or struggles, that we begin to reflect on what it is that God is doing daily in our life. And only when we even try to think about what is he doing, do we allow for him to live in our presence, right? If we don't realize or if we don't recognize or if we don't think about what God is doing or what he has done, then it's almost as if we have taken ourselves out of God's presence. So what does reflection do? It allows us to look for God. Essentially, we are looking for God in our daily life. We are hearing and listening for God in our daily life, right? So to reflect is the next step of this journey into the wilderness. When you go out and when you retreat, we don't just go there and sit there in silence. The sole purpose of a retreat is to reflect on what God is doing and has done in my life, to look at the check-in of our spiritual souls and to see where is it that I am and where is it that I need to go, and also to look for God so that we begin to see who we truly are. And this is what happened in the Garden of Eden, right? When Adam and Eve, when they had sinned and when they had fallen, you see that they weren't looking for God, right? In fact, they were in a sense of shame and guilt to the point where when they heard the voice of God, they were hiding from his presence, right? And because they were hiding from his presence and because they were trying to hide their shame or guilt, what happened? They began to see things from the worldly perspective. And as a result, God brings out to them and realizes and helps them to show, look, although you may not be looking for me or that you're trying to hide from me, I'm looking for you. I'm searching for you. I'm trying to speak to you, right? To bring us back to his presence. So if God is looking for us, and if God is constantly reflecting and thinking about us, and if we are at the forefront of the mind of God or from the heart of God, and if he's constantly desiring to check in us, we have to be able to do the same in return. We have to be able to check in with our Creator. We have to be able to have God and our Creator at the forefront of our minds. And we have to be able to reflect on what he's doing in our life and look after him and seek after him. It's a very simple message, but that is the sole purpose of reflection. I've used this image many times, but we see and we've heard the words mirror, mirror on the wall, right? So here is a desert and this huge mirror stuck in the middle of a desert, right? So if you think about it in some way, shape, or form, we have no idea where we are on this path throughout this desert. But let's just say you're right here in the front of the mirror. And as you're looking at it right now, you have an advantage, right? When you think about a mirror, you can see what it is that you're looking at right face to face, right? In our daily life and in our homes, we have many mirrors, right? If you go to the bathroom, there's a mirror usually on the wall. Sometimes we have extra mirrors in our bedrooms, sometimes even throughout our house. When we get into a car, we have a rear view mirror, we have side mirrors. When we get into commercial places or the churches, there's always a reflection of ourselves, right? Sometimes we may walk by a mirror and we may not even notice what is there right in front of us, including ourselves. But what I see here in this picture is the reality of what's behind me, but also the reality of what's ahead of me. So there's two things about a mirror that we can note. One, I don't know if you've ever seen, especially on a side view mirror of a car, it says, you know, objects in mirror may seem what? Usually they say closer than they appear, right? When you're looking through the side view mirror, it may look like it's pretty far away, but it might be really close to you. In the same way, as you look through this desert and you see this mirror that's reflecting, you may see yourself right in front of that mirror and you're going to be a huge image, right? You're going to be a reflection of yourself, you know, 5 feet or 6 feet or whatever it is. But as you see something behind you, it may look very, very distant, but in reality, it's very close to you. So the first thing is appearance, and what you see, although you see it for what it is, it may not always be clear in terms of how close or how far you are. It's not an accurate measurement in terms of a mirror, in terms of distance. But the second unique thing about a mirror is mirrors typically do not lie. It shows you what exactly is there in front of you, right? If there's an image or a reflection or something like that, it's pretty much reflecting or showing what is there in front of it, right? And so what I wanted to highlight to us, especially during this Lenten period, I wanted to think about our soul and ourselves, right? If you see this window pane, you can kind of see 4 little boxes or 4 little sections. And I always talk about it in terms of 4 different views that we can see in terms of our soul and who we are. So this first section, which is my public self means, for all of you, as Amal mentioned, you all know that I'm an Achin, right? As a priest serving in a parish. And that's what you know about me, right? There's nobody that will deny that. If I see myself or if I see other people, my family or people in the community, they will immediately know just by the way I'm dressed or by what they remember, by what they know, that my public self, everyone knows Diju Achin is an Achin, right? There's nothing secretive about that. And it's something that's public information. What that means is I know and others know. That's my public self. This is what everybody knows about me, whether I'm a male, whether I'm an Achin, whether I'm a social worker, you know, whatever it is, your profession, those things that people know about you. So think for a moment, what are all the things that people know about you? If person A, person B, and person C that have seen and interacted with you, what do they know as facts about you in terms of your public self that is not a secret, right? It's known to you and to others. The second part of the top pane is my blind spots. What does that mean? If you think about a car and when you're driving and when you look at the side view mirrors, you know, there's always what we call the blind spots, right? There's certain things that that mirror cannot capture if it's too close to the vehicle, right? So as you're driving, oftentimes you look at the mirror just to get an idea, but then most of the times the driving instructors and teachers will teach us, make sure that you turn back before you actually turn into that lane. Why? Because that's where your blind spot is, right? Those are areas that you may not be able to see even through a mirror or just at a quick glance. You have to be intentional about taking a step back and looking. So when we talk about a blind spot, this is really the areas where we don't really see ourselves, but others see in us. So what that means is oftentimes those that are driving through the road, although you're driving, you may not be able to see them, but everyone on that road and behind you sees you, right? So the blind spots in our spiritual life, when we talk about that, is those things that are not known to us, but are known to others. So for example, oftentimes I will ask our youth, or I might ask adults, what is one good, talent that you have? And most of the youth or most of our adults and people, they will say, oh, Achin, I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't know what my talent is. And so sometimes I will have to point it out to them and I'll say, well, one thing I've experienced from you is the gift of hospitality. That's a great talent. And that is something that you have that really I haven't seen in many other people. And so as they begin to think about it, they'll be like, oh, that's something that I never knew, right? So a blind spot is something that is unknown to you, but is known to others, right? And that could be good and bad. So sometimes you may not think that you have done any wrong to some people, but some people will say, he's really someone that always gets angry all the time, or he's someone that is really jealous, right? So other people are seeing this, but you may not be seeing it. So these are your blind spots. The third part of the window pane, which is the bottom left, is what is unknown to others, but known to you. What do I mean by that? What that means is this is kind of like our area of our hidden self, right? My hidden self. So you have my public self, my blind spots, then you have my hidden spots. And what do I mean by my hidden spots? This is those areas in our life where we may be struggling internally in our spiritual life, in our journey. There's not many people who can see this or who really know about it. This may be the areas where we're suffering in lust, or where we're suffering in pride, or where we're suffering in areas such as anger, or lacking peace, or pain, or misery, or sometimes doubt. Sometimes we lack faith. Sometimes we're in fear. And all of these things that are hidden and only known to us, meaning we hide it within ourselves, but it's not known to others. Each and every one of us who go to churches on Sundays or who present ourselves before our employers or people, they look at us and we might be able to put out a smile. But in the midst of that smile, deep down inside, there may be something that's going through our mind or through our struggle that no one else knows about. And sometimes it never gets uncovered. And because it never gets uncovered, we keep masking it and we keep masking ourselves. And so what happens? We become untrue to ourselves, meaning we are not being or able to be ourselves in front of other people because we're hiding something. That may be a sin, that may be something good, that might be something bad. But ultimately, these are our what we call our hidden spots. And then lastly, it is my unconscious self. What that means is these are things that both you and others just unconsciously do, and we have no idea or recognition or sight of it. This is not a dangerous area, but this is an area where oftentimes we are doing things and other people don't even realize it, and we don't even realize what we're doing, right? So I just want us to think through, as you look out and as you journey into the wilderness, try to think of these 4 window panes, right? And these 4 sections, and think about, what would people say about your public self? What would people confidently say about you in the public figure? Okay. Now take a look at that public figure, and then what about your hidden self? What is it that you have to say about yourself that does not match with your public self? And this is a very difficult area to look into, but this is what it means to truly reflect. The public self and my hidden self, when it's mismatched or when it's not aligning, and when we're not being true to ourselves and true to others, this is where or these are the areas that need spiritual improvement in our life, right? Or even the blind spots oftentimes is not as much of a concern because we don't see it, but others see it. But what about those things that others see that they may have pointed to us, but we don't want to admit to it? We don't want to correct it. We don't want to see it because we're pretending as if it doesn't exist and it's blind to us, right? So sometimes God brings people into our life to allow us to see those things, to recognize those things. And in those moments, we have to be able to open up our eyes and our hearts to be able to see it. So think through your public self, what others say about you and what you know about yourself, and how does that match with your hidden self? I'm going to keep moving on due to time to the next slide, which is recalibration. So we talked about retreating, we talked about reflecting. So when we retreat, we're withdrawing, we're breaking, we are disconnecting from the world to try and connect with God. As we try to reflect, we're looking to our inner self, and we're looking at those areas that might be hidden, that might be deeply rooted within, to try and see what is it that I can connect and be able to correct so that my public self matches with who I am inside. Recalibration is the next step. And what this means, if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 1 through 3, it says, "Then we turned and journeyed into the wilderness of the way of the Red Sea, as the Lord spoke to me. And we skirted Mount Seir for many days. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, you have skirted this mountain long enough. Turn northward." I don't know if we have ever realized this passage, and there are many passages such as these that speak about the command from God to recalibrate or to redirect them to the promised land or to the areas of the kingdom, right? Even Jesus Christ shows all the sinners, all the people that were having to be healed. He guides them to a new direction. He guides them to a new face and to a new area of their life. After they retreated, after they reflected, after they found who they were, he forced them in a way to recalibrate. So what does it mean to recalibrate? Recalibration is necessary when we begin to see any one of these 5 things. There are so many more than these, but I just wanted to highlight 5 of them. The first one is spiritual restlessness. What does that mean? Spiritual restlessness basically means when you and I are in a state where we just can't, really seem to pray. We can't really seem to find a focus, in our relationship with God. It seems to be a point where we really just can't find a purpose of even, wanting to go to church or really wanting to do any of the prayers or things like that. We're constantly in this battle between, the spiritual and the lack of spiritual things. The second thing is inconsistency in our walk with God. What I mean by that is oftentimes we may have an established routine. We're praying every single day. We're reading the Bible every single day. We're going to church every single Sunday. And then all of a sudden, something that was consistent now becomes inconsistent. At that point, we need to recalibrate. We need to refocus our direction. Sometimes in our life, we will lack a sense of peace and joy, right? In Malayalam, we say samadhanam, right? We say samadhanam. In English, that word peace, we don't really use it in our day-to-day language, right? We don't really use it in our everyday conversations. We don't say, hey, peace be with you, or hey, are you living in joy? We don't really talk like that, right? Most people think of peace and joy as just being happy, right? But we all know that happiness or feeling happy is something that's really just temporarily, right? You can give a child, a nice candy bar, and all of a sudden he's extremely happy. But the second you take it away from him, he's going to be extremely mad, right? So what happens when something is taken away from you? Or what happens if something is given to you? Do you maintain the same sense of peace and joy? And so the real test for a lot of these things is when we struggle with job situations or with school or with sickness, or sometimes when we lose our loved ones, right? These are the moments where life hits us to the core and it really strikes us. And at that moment, how do we find peace and joy in the midst of those moments? When we lack that inner peace and that joy to say that I am joyful in whatever situation or moment and I can find peace and I'm not worried or anxious about the next day or about the things that are going to happen in the next month or the year, that's when, if you lack that, you need to recalibrate. If you have a sense of aimlessness or purpose in your life, we can't find, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why am I even, working in this profession? Or why am I even, volunteering in this ministry? Or why am I even attending this church? When you lack that aimlessness or purpose, you need to be able to recalibrate. That means there's something there that needs to be recalibrated. And then another one, the fifth one, which is really a huge indicator for all of us, is when we neglect spiritual practices. When we stop fasting, when we stop praying, when we start reading the Bible, when we stop going to church, when we start participating in worship, when we stop attending Sunday school, when we withdraw from attending any events such as church events like retreats or conferences or anything related to the church. Remember, these are the only places and opportunities where we can obtain these spiritual practices and gain our soul. The moment we begin to neglect that, we are choosing the world. And when we choose the world, what's going to happen? Number 4, 3, 2, and 1 is all going to be happening at once. When we choose the world, we won't have an aim or purpose in our life. When we choose the world, we will lack that inner peace and joy. When we choose the world, we'll be inconsistent in our walk with God. And when we choose the world, we're going to find ourselves to be restless, right? Because we're constantly in this conflict and constantly in a point of trouble of our minds and our souls. I just wanted to end this evening as we think back to this message and going back to this image. We talked about 3 main things: retreat, reflect, recalibrate, which will lead me to the last point of feeling refreshed. I remember a lot of times growing up in my teens and especially even in my early childhood, I always remembered this Gatorade commercial. And I remembered all the time where, sports players or just different people, they're just looking lethargic, they're looking tired, they're looking drained. And all of a sudden, you drink this Gatorade and, just a few sips, and all of a sudden their face is just shining bright, right? And they have this smile and they have this new sense of energy and they have this new sense of purpose, and just everything that they were feeling in terms of that tiredness and weakness is gone away with just one sip, right? And I'm sure we've all seen that with Gatorade, Pepsi, all the things that the world shows us through these commercials and through everything that they try to entice us to buy their product. This is what marketing people do every single day, right? They're trying to convince us, hey, come and try this because this is going to give you, and this is most important to you, and it's going to give everything that you need, right? So what does it mean to be refreshed? What does it mean to be refreshed as you go through this wilderness? I don't know if any one of us have had this experience, but one experience where I feel that I had this opportunity of going into the wilderness was when I went on a missions trip to Bombadi, India. And myself, Joel Etchen from Dallas, and a couple of other guys, Anish and Steve, we had the opportunity to go and stay in Bombadi, near Kottayam in India, for almost about a whole month. And this is what I would say was my first experience of what I would say a retreat. First of all, I was taken to a foreign land, right? So having been born and raised in America, although we visited India oftentimes as a family, we were always surrounded by people. We always had plenty of food to eat, all the desserts and all the coffee and everywhere that we would visit. So this trip for me was a little bit different, right? It was going for a mission. And when I thought about a mission trip, what I had stored in my mind was that I was going to go and help people and serve people, right? That is what I had in my mind. When I went to India, I'm thinking I'm going to go save the world. I'm going to go try and do what I can to serve people, to serve those that are poor, try to help them and serve food, whatever it is that I need to do. But I would say the end result of that month in India was really a retreat for myself more than anything that I did for anybody else. And that retreat, what I mean by that is, as you know, Pambadi is kind of like on a hill, right? And the church is up on a hill. And it's a very saintly and holy place, similar to Padimala, similar to the places that I've been at, even at St. Tikhon's or wherever it is that I have, that you all have experienced as well in your day-to-day life. And when I was there, I began to understand what it meant to retreat. I learned what silence was. I learned what solitude was. I learned what it meant to not have to talk all the time or be surrounded by noise, right? I learned what it meant to actually sit and be still. I learned what it meant to actually be able to offer yourself to God in prayer. I learned what it meant to reflect, because there was plenty of time to be able to just sit and look at how God has blessed me and what God is doing in my life. At the same time, because I was in this stillness, I was able to look into my inner soul and see the areas that needed to be recalibrated. I saw the areas that were lacking in sense of peace or joy. I saw the spiritual disciplines and practices that was lacking in my life. I saw those areas where oftentimes when we talk about recalibration, what is it that we're trying to recalibrate? What is it that we're trying to focus on? And what is it that we're trying to redirect our life into? At that time, I was only in college and had not yet gone into seminary. But when I left that place, there was a new sense of feeling refreshed, right? And what I mean by feeling refreshed, it was something with a newfound sense of energy and peace that I can't explain in words. When I left that place, it was rather emotional because I felt like I encountered God in those 30 days that I was there, in being able to serve people and seeing people and being able to witness the prayers of the church and to be part of a community that was just truly joyful with the little that I had. You left with the sense of feeling refreshed. And when I think about the people in the scriptures, whether you see St. Paul, whether you see the life of Moses, when they had these experiences of going into the wilderness or going into the burning bush or seeing God on the way to Damascus and hearing his voice, they retreated, they reflected, they recalibrated, but then they refreshed with what? Refreshed with the spirit that already dwells within them. Each of us who are baptized Orthodox Christians, we have to be able to know and accept and see that the Spirit of God dwells in us. That Spirit brings us life. And if we see and allow for that Spirit to work in us and through us, when that Spirit is allowed to work, is when we feel refreshed. That Spirit has the power to move mountains. That Spirit has the power to be able to ordain men to priesthood. That Spirit is the one who unites two as husband and wife. That Spirit is the one who makes ordinary bread and wine to be the body and blood of Christ. That Spirit is the one who anoints and brings healing to those that are sick. So if we are searching for the Spirit of God, it begins by retreating and looking within ourselves. We don't have to go up high on a mountain. We don't have to be able to go and climb up a huge ladder to find God, because God dwells in the very presence of our soul and in our life. We just need to take a step back and retreat and reflect and recalibrate our purpose, our thoughts, and our actions to see this very God that is within us. And that is my hope and prayer as we continue through this Lenten journey, that we may see and feel refreshed through these coming days, especially as we have passed the mid-Lenten period, And as we approach the Blessed Holy Week, let us recalibrate by doing this personal retreat and reflection daily in our life, not just for a retreat or an event or something that we go to for church, but daily in our life. And if you can find 1 hour within the next 20 some days before Easter to just sit in mere silence, in the quietness and in the stillness, in the presence of God, with no TV, no phones, no music, no conversations, nothing, just 1 hour. If you can give yourself to God in retreat and reflect on some of these things that I have mentioned, to be able to look at that mirror and to look at your soul and to recalibrate in such a way where you now find a sense of direction and ultimately leading you to confession and ultimately leading you to be true to yourself, you will find that spirit alive within you as you will feel refreshed and rejuvenated and renewed by that spirit that dwells in you. May all glory and honor be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the living Holy Spirit, one true God, forever and ever.